Rome calling. Rome calling. This is the Gentleman Ultra. This is the Gentleman Ultra.
It's a terrific run from Mo Salah and it's a fantastic finish.
Parte il tiro di Pirlo, palla in rete, la Juventus è in vantaggio con un capolavoro di Andrea Pirlo.
Borca Valero solo al limite, la palla per lui, Borca Valero dentro per Joaquin, posizione regolare, Joaquin, incredibile, incredibile, quadrato come un quattrocentista con l'esterno dentro l'area di rigore per Rossi, 4-2, tripletta di Rossi.
Welcome back to the Gentleman Ultra, your host for the day, Federico Farcomeni, and I'm joined by the great Giancarlo Rinaldi. Hello Giancarlo, how's things?
That was a very kind introduction. Not many people call me great.
I'll tell you what. The first time I actually read your name in print, it was on a Football Italia issue, March 1998, I think it was. Front cover is Gabriel Omar Batistuta face, and it was a Fiorentina special feature on that. That was the very first time I read your name. Then you became famous for me, and for many others, I guess.
Yeah, well, I suppose so. I mean, yeah, those were good times for Italian football, and good times for me as well. It was, the Serie A was on Channel 4. Then I had just started writing actually in the 93-94 season guide was the first thing that I did for Football Italia, really, and then the magazine kind of came out of that. So yeah, I mean, that went on for a long time, and I wrote for every single edition of Football Italia magazine for those old enough to remember what a magazine was. Then before the internet took over, I used to write for those. So yeah, I guess the name was there for a long time.
Do you still keep copies?
Oh yeah, I've got them. Yeah, much to my wife's annoyance. Yeah, there's a cupboard under the stairs full of them.
Hopefully you haven't moved house in these years, because I guess that would be really hard. It is for me. Every time I move, although most of my collection is in Rome, but anyway, when I change home up north, it's always a pain, with all those books and magazines. But anyway, I loved it. I couldn't do without. So, go straight to our point. We're here to talk about rivalry between Fiorentina and Juve, the way you lived it, and obviously what you remember. I have highlighted a few moments. So it apparently, allegedly starts 100 years ago, nearly. It's 1928 when Juventus beat Fiorentina 11-0, and that's the first chapter, let's say, of the saga. I think there is a lot in between, but then we jump to 1982, which probably you remember, I don't know, very last day of the season, right?
Yeah. I mean, that I do and I don't remember. I mean, I certainly don't remember the 1928 one, despite what people might think. But I've read a lot of books actually about that, and that what irked, I think, Fiorentina fans in particular at that time was that fans were not so segregated at the time, so you would get the odd Juventino jumping up to celebrate a goal in Florence. I don't think they would do that now. So that used to irk people, and I think not having a kind of a natural local rival that was always in Serie A, the other teams in Tuscany have all tended to float up and down, and you'll know that Juventus are probably the best supported team in Italy outside of Turin as well. So if I think there was always likely to be almost seek out a rival, and that was going to be that. But by 82, certainly, you know, I mean, I was still only 12, 13 years old, so you know, still quite young at that point. But I do remember, you know, the Juventus obviously at that time, I think were on 19 Scudetti, and Fiorentina still on 2, as they still are, and that sort of elusive search for the third Scudetto. But that season was the season the closest Fiorentina have ever come to winning a third league title, and to have it, they would say, stolen on the very last day was hard to take. You know, the two teams were neck and neck, but Fiorentina took the lead, and on the final day, Fiorentina had to go to, I think everyone expected a playoff, really, to be honest, but on the last day, Fiorentina couldn't do any better than a draw with Cagliari, while Juventus beat Catanzaro with a penalty. You'll be surprised to hear. And
Liam Brady.
I mean, there was nothing really, you know, because I've looked back at the penalty, and it wasn't really all that controversial a penalty, to be honest. Even speaking as a follower of Fiorentina, I think most people would say it was a fair penalty, and he tucked it away well. What was more controversial, I think, was there was a goal ruled out for Fiorentina that, you know, nowadays I think would potentially have stood, certainly. I mean, I don't know, with VAR, maybe you could find something, but there was not an obvious foul in that goal, and that would have set up the mother of all playoffs for the league title. But it wasn't to be. And I mean, famously, Fiorentina fans would say meglio secondi che ladri, better to be second than to be thieves, which is, you know, I suppose that's the consolation you give yourself to, you know, to because you've not won the title, you claim your adversary stole it. The second star went on to Juve's shirts, and, you know, Fiorentina were left to lick their wounds. I mean, in reality, people looking back will see that Giancarlo Antonioni was injured for a large chunk of that season, and that's probably more likely what cost Fiorentina their shot at the title, really. He was sidelined for a fair chunk of time, a nasty head injury where they actually feared he might die on the pitch, and you know, so that really was probably as much a contributory factor. But in the eyes of certainly the hardcore fans, this was the ultimate piece of thieving, really, and you know, typical. Let's say on the sort of in a Fiorentina theme, certainly, that, you know, this was typical of Juventus to steal it with a penalty and get, you know, in the eyes of Florentines, they get all the favours all the time. So that really stoked that pot. If it needed stoking up the rivalry, then that really did it. In the modern era, that was kind of the opening gambit, if you will, in this bitter rivalry between the two sides.
Yeah, I mean, goal ruled out to Ciccio Graziani, and I was amazed to read there were 70,000 in attendance in Cagliari for that game, because Cagliari, obviously, they needed a point to stay up.
That's the thing.
And that's exactly what they got. And Catanzaro instead were pretty safe, so they didn't need anything, and that's exactly what they got.
Yes, which is so often the case at the end of an Italian season, that, you know, teams get exactly what they need. You know, it's these results of convenience. The only one that missed out, obviously, was Fiorentina.
Yeah, obviously, you know, that game, that season, it's probably must have been wonderful under Fiorentina's fan perspective, because, you know, you're there. Challenging for the league title, 44 points, coming into the last game of the season must be obviously heartbreaking. And I was surprised to read that, I don't know if you've watched it, but there is a mockumentary about that game, which means, the director actually relieves the drama of the season, and then the finale is different. So in the ending of that mockumentary, Fiorentina actually wins the third league title, which just, says enough about what that can do to your psychology, really, because, it must be very, very hard to take, of course.
Absolutely, yeah. No, when I think when you don't win many titles, to come so close and to have it snatched away by your most bitter rival, I think there's not much more galling than that, really, to be honest.
Yeah, and then another leap forward, we go to 1990, Uefa Cup Final. For the first time, two Italian teams actually are in the final, which is going to be something which we're going to see again in the 90s. But there's still no single final, so there is, first and second leg. First leg is played in Turin 3-1, and then second leg is actually played in Avellino because that season, because of the renovation of the Stadio Franchi for the 1990 World Cup, actually Fiorentina were playing in Perugia their home games, but then the Perugia home pitch was suspended for crowd disturbances in the previous game against Werder Bremen, I think. So they have to play Avellino the return leg, and it's a 0-0. I don't know if you have any insight on that double final, but again, it's Juve coming out on top.
Yeah, well, this is much more in my memory. I was actually living just outside of Florence that year, a place called Borgo San Lorenzo in the Mugello region, just outside of Florence, and watched a lot of the games with a good friend on television, because, as you say, Fiorentina that season were playing away from home all the time, and it was an epic journey to get to the final. I mean, really carried by Roberto Baggio. You would not be surprised to hear one game that particularly sticks in my mind was I think they played Dynamo Kiev in the earlier rounds, and the pitch was like an ice rink, and yet he made it look as if it was the best playing surface in the world. So I mean, it wasn't a team without other talented players, but he was certainly the shining star. But there was a lot of controversy about the selection of Avellino as the
neutral ground.
There's the neutral ground, because certainly, again, in the eyes of Fiorentina fans, this was a sort of hotbed of Juventus support. So why pick that? There were a lot of other potential venues that seemed more neutral. I mean, in the end, I don't think, again, I don't know that the choice of ground made a difference. I do remember, I think there was definitely in the first leg a suspicion of a foul or an offside. I think Casiraghi scored one of the goals. I can't remember now. But, there was definitely some controversy in one of the Juventus. I mean, ultimately that wouldn't have made a difference. But, it did feel again a bit like, not them again. It's like you're everywhere you turn, they're going to be there. Whenever you've got a chance of actually winning something, who's going to thwart you? It's like sort of Sherlock Holmes meeting Moriarty every corner he turns, kind of thing. And they're definitely or kryptonite to Superman. Just you can't avoid it. You seem to be drawn to whenever there's a sort of potentially special moment, because again, European trophies are not that common in the Fiorentina trophy cabinet, so to have a chance to win one, and it's Sod's Law. It's not like now where there were hundreds of teams in it as well. You had to meet an Italian team in the final, and it had to be Juventus, and you had to lose again. So definitely, another bitter pill to swallow, and then there was another. Well, I'm sure we're going to get to this. There was another very bitter pill to swallow shortly afterwards, when
Yeah, we get in there.
Yes, when unfortunately, what happened obviously was that the man who'd single-handedly kind of helped take Fiorentina to the final was not content with pinching the UEFA Cup. They also pinched our star player in the shape of Roberto Baggio, and I was, as I say, I was living outside Florence at that time, and it was it was heated times. I think it would be fair to say there was a lot of police presence, a lot of this was the build up to the World Cup, 1990 World Cup in Italy as well, and the Italian national team was training in Florence, and there was it was almost like a city under siege at times. Really, such was the bad feeling at losing Baggio to Juventus was really, I can't think of, people say, was it worse to lose Batistuta or Baggio? To me, there was no comparison, because Baggio was to Juventus, and also, Batistuta had given nearly 10 years to Fiorentina, whereas Baggio had been, 5 years, but, two of them really badly hampered by injury and kind of nursed back to fitness. And this was going to be, as proved to be, the next big star of the Italian national team. And to lose, I think there's always been a thing in Florence, even when prior to this, when they had Giancarlo Antonioni, at least if you couldn't win the Scudetto, you could watch Antonioni play. And I think there was a same sort of cult of the individual in Florence that, to have Baggio at least was a consolation, even if you couldn't win trophies. But to lose him meant your team was really stripped of, its absolute star. And, that transfer has been talked about a lot. Baggio himself said that, he would have stayed, but the club was in a period of transition. They were changing owners, and I think, they needed to kind of cash in their chips, and so they sold Baggio to Juve, and, the rest was history. But, I suppose if we're talking of rivalry, there was a kind of postscript to this story, I suppose, was when Baggio returned with Juventus and didn't take a penalty. The normal penalty taker didn't take the penalty against Fiorentina. It was missed by Gigi D'Agostini, I think, and Baggio then left the pitch and picked up a Fiorentina scarf on his way off, which what a lot of Juventus fans found hard to forgive. So there was definitely that was another kind of torrid game, and it was real kind of again a siege atmosphere in Florence for his return. And that was Juventus under Gigi Maifredi, who doesn't hold a lot of fond memories for Juventus fans, I don't think. I think afterwards they said that it had been agreed that he wouldn't take a penalty, but certainly it didn't. If you've spent that amount of money on a player, I think you probably would expect him to take a penalty against whoever it was. But the fact that he didn't, the fact that Juventus lost, I think that clouded the vision of Baggio in the eyes of a lot of Juve fans as well. But it made Fiorentina fans probably still love him, and it opened a spell where Fiorentina couldn't do much in a season, but they quite often managed to beat Juventus, at least in Florence. And so that was, again, the consolation for a bad season would be at least beating Juventus, because it's far and away the biggest game of the season for Fiorentina fans.
Yeah, 7th of April 1991. If you let me, I'd like to read a couple of extras from the book 12 Yards by Ben Littleton. I helped Ben with that chapter, especially on this episode. So I was delving into archives, and you are telling this brilliantly. Just wanted to add a couple of details. One is, obviously, Baggio was asked by Manfredi the night before the game if he wanted to take a penalty against Fiorentina, and apparently his eyes betrayed the answer. So they knew it was going to be a no. He was 23 years old at the time. It was about, as you said, he was about to win the Ballon d'Or in a couple of years. So he was really the rising star of Italian football in that moment. And then a few days before returning to Florence, he told a teammate, "It's about time I decide what I want to do when I grow up," which is interesting. And also a few years earlier, apparently, Nicola Berti from Inter had been so upset at the abuse received from Fiorentina fans when he first returned to the club after joining Inter that he was taken off after half an hour. And Baggio lasted longer than that, despite the incessant taunts. I didn't want to mention, but I have to, because the chant was Baggio... Well, Baggio puttana, l'hai fatto per la grana. Baggio, you whore, you did it for the money. But as you said, when he picked up the scarf, he was kind of applauded at some point by Fiorentina fans. So it was a bit weird. And I think he had scored all 13 penalties during that season until that game, until his refusal. And then Diego Fuser went on to score the only goal of the game. So Fiorentina obviously won 1-0, and the headline from the Gazzetta dello Sport following day was Baggio il gran rifiuto, Baggio the refusal, which was like a parallel with a country's most famous literary gran rifiuto, which is how the poet Dante referred to Pope Celestine V. Abdication of the papacy in 1294. In 1294. So it goes a bit deep.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah. I mean, it was really, lots of stuff was really written around that game. And, it's great that you were actually there to leave the atmosphere. And also the stuff about Italian 90 I didn't know, which is great to know that, that team actually came close to the final anyway, regardless of that kind of atmosphere. Well, let's say. So anyway, to stay in the 90s, 92 as well is kind of important because there is a game in Florence which Fiorentina wins 2-0, Battistuta on the score sheet, and up until that game, apparently he had probably just scored a couple of goals, and then he scores 10 after that game, which means it actually ignites another history for Battistuta in Florence. So that's a key game. And then in 1994, another unfortunate game for the Purple Colours. It's when Fiorentina go 2-0 up in Turin, but then loses in the last 15 minutes to 3 goals. And the third one is scored by a rising star called Alessandro Del Piero. There again, I remember Guerin Sportivo front cover, which was È nata una stella, a star is born, which was evident, that signature goal of Del Piero, obviously. And then 1998, a big win for Fiorentina where Firicano, Olivera, Robbiati on the score sheet. Fiorentina by Alberto Malesani, they win that game 3-0. Apparently, that's another iconic moment for Fiorentina in the 90s. So, which is the one you prefer, you pick up for yourself?
Well, I think when Battistuta beat Juve, I think was a special moment. I think I've got a memory certainly. I don't know if that was this game that you spoke about, but I remember him ending up sort of not doing his usual machine gun celebration, but he ended up sort of playing the guitar. He started strumming out, sort of broke out into kind of music. He started playing air guitar because he was so excited, And I think that to me that was an iconic player for Fiorentina. So that was an iconic victory against the arch enemy, and with one of Fiorentina's greatest ever players playing a key part, so that was a very memorable moment to see Batistuta score. He scored against almost everyone, to be fair, but to see him score against Juventus, I think that's like cherry on the cake moment, really, to get that icing on the cake. Really, to get that moment, to see him scoring against Juventus, always a pleasant treat. But I think the truth is that I'd say, especially although victories in Florence are great, and the choreography is always special when and I mean it's a shame that work's ongoing at the Franchi. I mean the Curva Fiesole is shut, which is although the Curva, the supporters have moved, but the atmosphere definitely, because that is always the focus of every season in Florence, really, in terms of what kind of display they're going to put on. I mean, I think before the Baggio return was sort of a complete skyline of Florence that was put up in the ground. They always put on a special one. Obviously, there was a recent one, which I'm too polite to repeat, but the Juve, and put your second. The next one begins with M. So they always prepare a special choreography to welcome Juventus. But wins are not that uncommon in Florence. Where they are uncommon is in Turin, whereas I think we're talking a handful. So those games tend to be the more memorable ones. Although in recent times, I guess the 4-2, the Giuseppe Rossi game is the one that I think most Fiorentina fans, younger fans, will remember best. That was such an amazing game of two halves and game of a comeback, and such an epic individual performance that that's of recent times. That's been the sweetest victory, I would suggest.
Destro di Tevez, Juventus in vantaggio al 37esimo minuto. Le porta vuota, Pogba fa 2-0. Paul Pogba sinistro ed è 1-2. La Fiorentina di mezzo allo svantaggio, rientra in partita. Rossi si gira su Pogba, zona tiro. Rossi va in porta. Pepito Rossi. Borca Valero solo al limite, la palla per lui, Borca Valero dentro per Joaquin, posizione regolare, Joaquin! Incredibile! Per Rossi! 4-2! Tripletta di Rossi!
Yeah, because especially because watching back the highlights, I had forgotten about the Juve players' celebration. So there is Carlos Tevez. Obviously, Argentine, he knows inside out the Gabriel Batistuta history, so he scores under the Fiesole, and he's obviously mimicking the gun machine. And then point is, Paul Pogba scores again on an assist from Juan Cuadrado, who was actually playing for Fiorentina that day anyway. And then, he goes 2-0 up, and he does the same, which is, mad. So obviously then comes, as you said, the second half, and Fiorentina winning 4-2, incredible. In the space of just a few minutes, they just turned the game upside down. And then Della Valle, I think, famously said after the game, it was due mitragliate for them. It was four fucilate from us. I don't know how actually you translate fucilate in English, but it's another gun anyway.
A rifle. I think
a rifle. Yeah. Four rifles for us.
And I think we should be fair to Juan Cuadrado, because I think he had an assist at the right end as well. I think he had a galloping run to set up the last goal. And that was Joaquin, I think, played a key part in that game from memory. Mati Fernandez got failed for the penalty. So it was an amazing comeback, and I think if memory serves, it was Nato that was in goals for Fiorentina. There was a great save just before half-time. You had early in the second half, maybe, when it could easily have gone 3-0, and I think then, it would have been good night. But that game I was watching with my dad in Scotland, and we were phoning back and forward to friends in Italy, saying, how terrible it was or whatever, and then by full time we were phoning to see how amazing it was. We couldn't believe what had unfolded before our eyes, because for Fiorentina to come back in a game like that against Juventus is a very rare thing, and for Juve to give up a 2-goal lead was something extraordinary, and it was definitely still feel a bit of regret for Giuseppe Rossi and the injuries that he had, because I think he could have been. He was a great player, but he could have been even more of a player if he hadn't been tortured by injuries. And I think that would have been, well, maybe Fiorentina's gain, certainly Italy's gain, if he'd been able to play longer and more often, and that game was certainly, his absolute golden moment in Florence, and one that will, live long in the memory for Fiorentina fans.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously you were mentioning the, wins in Turin, which have been rare. One of them coming in 2015 with Mohamed Salah. Was it a brace in the cup?
Yeah, yeah.
Fiorentina winning 2-1, if I'm not wrong. So that was a nice one, I think, as well. And then winning 3-0 in Turin, I think. But that was behind closed doors recently during the pandemic. But that was another good one, I suppose. Sometimes, it's been key games for, I think Juve won the 8th consecutive title, beating Fiorentina on one of the last games of the season. So, more often than not, they can be meaningful games, even for other reasons anyway, on the pitch. And I wanted to ask you as well, this transfer from Baggio obviously was just probably one of many which were following later on. So Miccoli, Moretti 2002, Chiellini and Bocino 2005, Felipe Melo 2009, Nato in 2015, Quadrado in 2015. But then obviously, how can we forget the key ones, which were Bernardeschi, Federico Chiesa, who famously also said, I would never go to Juventus, and then he went, and Dusan Vlahovic. So, I'm probably forgetting someone, but which of these you think were, obviously Baggio was the most painful one. Can we say, is there any other of these coming second behind that?
I was going to say the most pleasant one was Felipe Melo, because I think we got about £20 million for him, and he was absolutely useless for Juventus. So that was still. I think in recent times, Baggio was money well spent, regardless, even if he didn't live up to maybe what some Juve fans hoped. But the more recent ones, there's been questions about all of them, I suppose. Chiesa possibly was the most hurtful one of the more recent ones, I think, because again, a young Italian star on his way up. His dad had played for Fiorentina. His brother was on Fiorentina's books, and it may still be there, and I remember one goal celebration where he went, his wee brother was a ball boy, and Chiesa went and celebrated with him. Wasn't so bothered about Bernardeschi, because I think, he kind of, his attitude seemed to be that he was ready to go. And Vlahovic, really, we hadn't had for that long, he kind of exploded and then he was gone. So, it was painful. But Chiesa probably the most painful of the recent ones. But you'd have to say, in recent times, certainly Fiorentina have done pretty good business out of Juventus in terms of money coming in to, satisfaction with the players they've acquired. I don't think, most of them have not delivered, I think, what Juventus would have hoped for, even though, they've been all good players, I think. But, I don't think they've really got what they thought their money's worth was for these players. And there's been plenty, there was a guy who used to do I can't believe we've got this long into this chat and I've not used the word hunchback, Gobby, but here we go, because for whatever reason the Fiorentina fans call Juventus the Gobby, the hunchbacks, and there was a guy who used to do, if you signed for Fiorentina from Juventus going the other way, he would carry out, say Moreno Torricelli as an example, he had to carry out the hunchbacking of was a ceremony. There's a ceremony for Angelo Di Livio. I think these players, that all of them that came to Florence.
Was it Maresca as well?
Yeah, he would carry out this ceremony to ceremonially remove their hunchback so they could be free to live a happy life and play for Fiorentina. So, and even you look at the current team now of Fiorentina, there's any number of ex-Juventus players in there, from Mandragora to Fagioli to Nicolosi Caviglia. I mean, we've put together a whole midfield of players that Juve didn't want, so it's interesting that although, for the fans, the rivalry is intense. Obviously, for players, it's not such a thing. And even, as I say, the signings, there'll be nothing ever, I don't think, will compare to the Baggio signing. I think now, yes, it's painful, but it's become almost established that players break through at Fiorentina and then Juventus sign them. It's a pretty well-worn path, and it's certainly not as painful for Fiorentina fans as it once was. And as I say, they do then. I can remember one picture that they showed. I think it was, there were maybe 3 Fiorentina players that were at Juventus at the same time, and they were all sitting on the bench. It was like Neto, Quadrado, and Bernardeschi, I think, all sitting on the bench, and one says to the other, well, I might have a shower anyway. As if to say, even because they were getting so little game time. So that was, Fiorentina fans would mock just, well, be careful what you wish for, I suppose, because you go to Juventus, the expectation is greater, and it hasn't always worked out so well for these players. They go for big money. They think they're going to be superstars at Juve, but it's one thing to be, revered in Florence. It's quite another. Juventus have had many champions in their midst, so the expectation level is a lot higher. So as I say, the players go back and forward, but it is still a rivalry for the fans. And I think a lot of people say, well, it's a one-way rivalry and Juventus don't really care, but I don't buy that. Obviously Juventus have got other rivalries, bigger rivalries, but I do think that if you watch your social media, I do think you find that Juventus fans do take a certain pleasure in beating their pesky rival. It's not the be all and end all of a season that it is to Fiorentina fans, but I think it's still quite annoying to have those little upstarts from Florence come along and beat you. It doesn't happen very often, but I think when it does, it stings a bit. Like maybe like being bitten by a little dog or something. I think it's not. It's a bit irritating. You don't want it to happen. So as I say, it is. In some ways, it's certainly more felt by Fiorentina fans, but I do think the sting still hurts for Juve, and maybe not as much as losing a Turin derby or losing to the Derby d'Italia, the Inter or whatever. Yeah. But it's still a game that I believe they would prefer not to lose.
I agree completely. I just failed to mention two more games, but briefly. When Fiorentina beat Juventus again with Battistuta in '99. I think that season again, Fiorentina were top. Christmas they were top, and I think they beat Juve in January or February 1-0. I can't remember exactly when, but that's Battistuta netting the winner. And I think apart from 1982, that season as well was probably when Fiorentina dreamed again with winning the Scudetto.
Yep. And that was the season when Battistuta got injured, wasn't it? That was the season where he was injured and they keep him as close as they've ever done. It was a painful one, yeah. Most of the memories are painful when you're a Fiorentina fan. Most memories are painful ones.
Well, I think for most teams, apart from the big three anyway, you'll always have painful memories. And another one, it's Europa League 2014. Again, another painful memory, I'm sorry, but it was very close because, Juve won it in Florence with Pirlo's free kick, and then it was a 1-1 in Turin. So, again, that was really close, and I think that was the season you were supposed to walk on to the final in their own ground, but Benfica didn't agree with that.
Yes, No, that's right, yeah. No, I would say, that was close. I remember those being close games, very tense games, but, if you've got a player like Pirlo, he can always deliver a moment of quality that will decide a game. It's painful. I mean, I'd have to say, that you mentioned the Del Piero goal earlier on. I'm of a nature that I can, especially with the passage of time, sort of accept. That was a great goal. It hurt me a lot at the time when it went in, but I've got the ability to say, that was an iconic goal. Despite how painful it might have been, and in the same way, although Pirlo delivered pain to Fiorentina, he was a great player, and his free kicks were an absolute joy to behold. From the moment I can remember sitting having a typically gigantic Italian meal in somebody's house and watching Pirlo score the free kick that won the under-21 European Championships. And, I was gobsmacked then at just his ability, and was so pleased that, because it did look, people forget, it did look like he might not deliver on the talent that he showed as a young player. He had to go away to Brescia to kind of break through and convince the big teams that he was a player worth taking a risk on. But that's all to say that I am able to appreciate when a Juventus player does a good thing. I might not appreciate it at the time, but I can appreciate it over time that these were great goals, and I remember the Pirlo free kick, and it was painful, but a thing of beauty as well. Yeah. Thanks for this. I'll finish off with a personal memory. I tell you what, it's this year. It happened this year, so it's very recent. So. There is a tournament they play here of the magistrates. Okay, so the Italian magistrates, they go to a place and they have like a tournament between all the different cities. So my friend, I grew up in Rome and I'm a Lazio fan. So this guy is a friend of mine, and he used to be a Lazio fan when we were kids, but his father was a Roma fan, and his other friends were massive Roma fans. So eventually, where we lost sight, he reverted back to Roma. So that's painful for me. But anyway, so he was part of one of the teams of the magistrates of Tuscany, because he lives in Livorno now. And then he introduces me, to all his teammates and colleagues. And there is this guy from Florence. So introduces me and says,
Yeah, this is Federico, my friend. Unfortunately, he's a Lazio fan. And the guy from Florence says, well, it could be worse. It could be much worse. And I said, yeah, like supporting Juve, And he said, so he stares at me. Actually, it turns out he's a Juve fan living in Florence. I wanted to kill myself. Exactly.
What were the chances? You found the one Juventino in Florence. That's unlucky.
Not a good introduction, I must say. But then, I managed to, to come back with that. But at the same time, I said, if I was born in Florence and I didn't have another team to support, who would I turn to? So maybe that's the choice actually people make. They live in Florence, they don't want to support Fiorentina for some reason, and they turn to Juve. I think that's the other option because, I don't think they're going to support Pisa or
no,
or any
I
other
don't
team.
think so. I don't think so. And then, the bitter part of me would say, well, they'll pick the most successful team as well. You're not gonna say, I'll not support Fiorentina. Who I'll support? Lecce. That's not going to happen. So it's going to be Juve or Inter or Milan or whatever. So and the chances are, you can almost tell. I think sometimes fans of certain teams by the age they are, and that sort of people who grew up in the 1970s are likely to be Juventus fans because Juve were winning, Scudetto under Trapattoni or whatever. You can tell that. Whereas later on, you get Milan fans. What I'm trying to say is glory hunters. Really, is the term I'm trying to use. But that's a slightly bitter view of it. But you're right though. If they were going to support someone, who would they support? It would probably be Juve. But although, as I say, they are hard to find in Florence, and I think famously at one time anyway, there was no Juve club in Florence. I think it was about the only major city where they didn't have one. So they certainly it's difficult to. You wouldn't go walking around in a black and white shirt in Florence without getting some adverse comment.
Yeah. I mean, also you mentioned Trapattoni. Are we forgetting any other manager who crossed the divide?
Oh, no, that's a good question. I'm sure there must have been. Certainly, Trapp was the most famous.
He did well. Yeah,
yes, and he did do a good job, and did take Fiorentina high up. I mean, that was certainly something. But I've been back and forward everywhere really, right? As I say, through the team managers, whatever. There's been, because I think fans have one view of football, and a footballer maybe has another view because it's their job, isn't it? So they're not going to be quite as I can always think, I would never, if I'd been any good at football, I would never have signed for Juventus. But that's easy for me to say because it's never going to happen. Whereas the reality is, if in your line of work, whatever it might be, if somebody said to me, would you sign for, you're a journalist, would you sign for, if somebody comes along with, 10 times your salary and says, well, you're coming right for us? Probably is the answer. I think I probably would, even if I didn't particularly like the company. I'm sure I could get over it. So I think it's definitely it's an intense game, and the players know what it means to the fans. But I don't think it means the same, unless the player maybe is a Florentine player. I don't think it means quite the same to the players as it does to the fans. But the fans would certainly be well stoked up for it again.
Yeah, obviously Claudio Ranieri, but then again, as you said, is obviously a good professional. The same Palladino was coming from.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's plenty that I've had Juve
from a Juve experience, and just to land on the very end, Luciano Spalletti, Certaldo is very close to Florence, and obviously one of his backroom staff, faithful, Baldini, he didn't join him at Juve. for that specific reason, because he's a massive Fiorentina fan. Obviously, Spalletti didn't say that in a press conference when he.
Right.
But everybody knows this guy Baldini is a massive Fiorentina fan, so he said, "No, I'm not joining you at Juve. Maybe next time. Maybe next time."
Yeah. And I forgot Cesare Prandelli as well. Of course, he was in Florence and a great player for Juventus.
The same Pioli, obviously played for both, and then now he's not there anymore because of, well, we know why. So, so finally, do you think Vanoli has what it takes to lift Fiorentina from current situation?
It's a difficult job for anybody. I mean, I think if intensity does the job, if touchline kind of activity could turn things around, then he's certainly the man to do it. I'm quite intrigued. I hope he gets a good. I feel he should have a good relationship with Fortini, the fullback, the young fullback at Fiorentina, because he actually reminds me quite a lot. I'm old enough to remember Vanoli playing for Fiorentina, and Fortini actually, just his hairstyle, the way he runs, reminds me of Vanoli. So I'm hoping he can get. It's going to be a hard task, and it's going to be very hard. I mean, the best way to win over the Fiorentina fans would be to beat Juventus in one of your first games in charge. Would be a big thing. But it's a tough ask. He's got the players. There's a good enough squad there to get itself out of the trouble it's in. And I was impressed by Vanoli when he worked his work at Venezia. So I think he is a good coach. But the thing is, I've said this a few times to people, that the pressure now on every single game is enormous, and he's going to have to be, a great psychologist to get that team not to collapse every time it concedes a goal, because the pressure. If you go behind, you're bottom of the league or near bottom of the league. You need points desperately, So to go behind, to lose goals, he's going to have to be a master of psychology to convince this team now that it won't, because I think it's thrown away a lot of games from good positions as well. So it will be a hard job, but I'm reasonably optimistic that he can do it. Serie A is so tight, such a compact league, that it wouldn't take a lot of good results to get out of the relegation mire. I don't think the season started hoping for European football. That's not going to happen. So it is a dogfight, and the sooner they kind of adapt to it, and I think he is that intense kind of manager that can gee a team up for that sort of situation. So fingers crossed, Vanoli is the man.
Thank you, Giancarlo, for your time, your insight, your memories. It was fantastic to spend time with you, and I really hope our listeners loved this episode. Very, very insightful. So thanks again to Giancarlo Rinaldi, and hopefully speak to you again soon.
It was a pleasure. It was an absolute pleasure.
Bye for now. Keep enjoying the Gentleman Ultra.